Welcome to the Private Corporate Counsel Podcast. The Private Corporate Counsel Podcast is a podcast put on by Private Corporate Counsel, a Florida business law firm that focuses on helping small and medium-sized businesses in issues relative to their business, and also helping with conflict resolution, consulting, and mediation services. Today, I want to talk to you about resilience. What does it mean for an organization to be resilient? And what are the elements of organizational resilience? What does a company need to do in order to manage the transition from good times to bad times? And what does a company need to do to recover from bad times to good times? Can a company last during these difficult times during their organizational life? This topic is important because many businesses go through a business life cycle that has ups and downs. And while it can be very great to have a business that succeeds and produces ultimate cash flow and is a great environment for people to work in, the truth is that many businesses experience downturns based on a number of factors. Whether those factors are based on internal influences or external influences, it's nonetheless inevitable that a business will fail at some point in time to meet all the benchmarks that they set for themselves. No business is going to be firing on all 8 cylinders at the same time. There are going to be times when they have a difficult journey ahead of them. That journey may actually lead to bankruptcy. We've recently seen that journey end and reached in bankruptcy for large organizations. For example, Red Lobster. Red Lobster was a thriving restaurant chain, and for internal and external reasons, experienced a great deal of challenge and ended up filing for relief under Chapter 11 of the Bankruptcy Code. So this idea of organizational resilience is important and real for all businesses, whether they're new businesses or seasoned businesses, whether they're small, medium-sized, or enterprise businesses. When I think about the word resilience as it deals with businesses, I think about 3 categories. The first category I think about is executive resilience. The next category is entrepreneurial resilience. And then finally, of course, organizational resilience. So let's start with executive resilience. What does it mean for an executive to be resilient? Well, that can be broken down into several parts. The first part of executive resilience includes the personal resilience of the executive. Does that executive have the physical stamina to deal with difficult situations, to deal with a downturn that affects him or her personally? And those personal issues can be physical health, mental health, emotional health, and spiritual health. Is the executive strong enough to take the time and effort necessary to actually execute during difficult times and to weather the storm? Are they emotionally strong enough to deal with all of the negative emotions that they'll experience when their business is on a downturn? Are they mentally strong enough to know that the knowledge that they have is not going to be sufficient for them to tackle the challenges that are coming their way? Do they have the capacity to seek out new knowledge, to take the time to expose themselves to new concepts and new ideas? Do they have the ability to process that information? Or are they too mentally stressed to handle those critical mental health issues? And then, of course, spirituality is important. Are they grounded in the right principles? Are they shifting from an outward focus where they're trying to do good for society and create something bigger than themselves to just self-preservation and focus more inward? Are they connected to a higher purpose? So this personal resilience aspect of executive resilience is pretty important. But it's not the only thing that's important when we're dealing with the executive resilience issue. Also important are the relationship resilience issues. Is the executive in a strong personal relationship, whether it's intimate or not, with someone else that can help them fight off the episodes of loneliness that they will encounter as they deal with these difficult issues? Is that relationship strong enough to offer the support that the executive needs when things are difficult, when loneliness sets in, when episodic depression sets in, when episodic anxiety sets in? Does that executive have the support team necessary to help him or her deal with some of those personal resilience issues that will undoubtedly affect him or her? And do they have the sense of security in those relationships to know that regardless of what happens with the business, that their relationship won't be compromised? Whether those relationships are personal, intimate relationships, familiar relationships, or friendships, they're very important to understand the resilience level of those relationships for the executives. Because if the executive doesn't have strong relationship resilience, then it is likely that they won't have the personal resilience necessary to deal with the difficult issues during the downturn of the organization. And then, of course, there are the professional resilience issues. If, for example, the executive is in a professional service organization that requires continuing education, will the pressures of the downturns of the organization and the economy, or whether those forces are external or internal, influence the executive in such a way so that he or she is not fulfilling his or her professional obligations to maintain his or her professional license, whether it be a lawyer, an accountant, a doctor, an architect, or any other profession? So the professional resilience is also very important. Do they have the wherewithal, the self-awareness, and the ability to continue to develop their professional goals and aspirations, and to make progress in their professional life cycle despite the downturn and difficulties for the business? And then, of course, is their financial resilience. If this business were to completely close down and go bankrupt, will the executive still be okay? Or will they be homeless? Having the financial personal resilience is a very important factor in determining the executive resilience. Without the financial resilience, that the executive may be forced to make decisions that will definitely affect him or her, his or her family and personal relationships, but also the business as well. So this idea of executive resilience, we should pay attention to. We should spend a lot of time really building our personal, our relationship, our professional, and our financial resilience. The executive who are strong and resilient in those areas will be resilient enough to help the organization deal with these difficult times. Now, moving on from executive resilience to entrepreneurial resilience, of course, the first element of entrepreneurial resilience is executive resilience. If the executive is not resilient, it's going to be hard to maintain that entrepreneurial resilience. But in addition to the executive resilience, the business model has to be resilient. Does this organization, does the business, even though there's a downturn, focus on the right customer segment? Or does the business need to focus on another customer segment? Is the value proposition strong enough? Is the value proposition the right value proposition? Or does this organization need to look at the value proposition to determine whether or not it's a good fit for the target customer base? What's the relationship with the customers look like? What's the channel distribution look like? What are the key activities and the key resources that the business is engaging in, as opposed to what needs to be done to get out of this downturn, to be resilient and to recover from this difficult time? And are there strategic partners that are necessary and required to help with that transition process? What's the cost structure like? Do we need to look at the cost structure and eliminate some of the reoccurring variable costs or some of the fixed reoccurring costs? Can you do that? What flexibility do you have in that process? The cost analysis is important for the organization and the entrepreneurial resilience for a number of reasons. Because without the resources necessary to cover the cost, the organization will not have the degree of viability it needs to recover. Now, when we're done with that core organizational model, we look at other issues that affect the organization as well. And so this entrepreneurial resilience is necessarily a combination of the executive resilience, which is the personal resilience, the relationship resilience, the professional resilience, and the financial resilience, and the business model resilience, which includes the customer segment, the value proposition, the customer relationship, the channel of distribution, the key activities and resources necessary to deliver on the value proposition, the key partners that may be necessary for organizational development and growth and exploitation, the cost analysis, and then finally the revenue stream. Does the revenue stream need to be examined to determine whether or not there are alternative revenue streams that are available for the organization? So this idea of entrepreneurial resilience encompassing at a high level the executive resilience and the business model resilience is important. Those two categories, executive and entrepreneurial resilience, are so important for organizational resilience. But organizational resilience also includes other issues. One issue that organizational resilience includes, in addition to executive and entrepreneurial resilience, is organizational leadership. Does the organization have the necessary leadership to deal with and tackle the issues that it faces during the downturn, whether that downturn is due to negative influence such as economic forces, political forces, environmental forces, or other forces that the business have no control over, or whether they're due to internal forces such as lack of innovation or conflicts between key workers within the organization, whether they're at management, leadership, or line role, or whether or not there's some organizational issues involving technology that may be outdated or not operational. And so when we look at the organizational leadership, we're focusing on the executive leadership, the entrepreneurial leadership, and the organizational leadership issues to determine whether or not the organization is resilient. And that resilience has to include resilience in marketing, in sales, in operations, in training, in quality control, in planning and development and execution. You should have the ability to create a scorecard for the organization to understand where the organization is at the critical time, the 1.0 of the organization at that time, if you will, and create a vision for the 2.0 of the organization and have the ability to do the difficult task and make the sacrifices on an executive level, on an entrepreneurial level, on an organizational level to actually recover from the downturn. So this idea of resilience is very important for organizations that are small and medium-sized businesses, because the fact of the matter is that many of those organizations fail within the first year or two or 3 or 4 or 5 of opening. And even those who survive more than 10 years or more, they still have the potential of failing. And sometimes if the organization is resilient, if the entrepreneurs are resilient, and if the executives are resilient, the business will stand a chance of recovery. And sometimes that recovery will create an organization that's more robust, that's more adaptive, that's more responsive to the environment than it was before, and become a strong competitor in the marketplace. And you've seen examples of this in the past. A good example it is IBM. IBM at one point in time faced tremendous external forces that caused its business to have a tremendous downturn. And it had to be resilient in order to get through those tough times. You've seen it in the airline industry, you've seen it in the auto industry, and you've seen examples of organizations that were not resilient, that weren't able to make it. Blockbuster comes to mind. We talked about Red Lobster earlier on. That comes to mind. And so if there isn't a strong degree of executive resilience, entrepreneurial resilience, and organizational resilience, it's going to be tough for the business to recover. So my plea to you today is to focus on this idea of resilience. Understand what it means to be a resilient executive. Understand what entrepreneurial resilience is, and understand what organizational resilience is, and strive to build your resilience, to build your personal resilience, your entrepreneurial resilience, and your organizational resilience.
Contact us at 877-647-7887 or email us at info@pcc.law to learn more about the Private Corporate Counsel program and how we can help you and your business on your journey to success.